Okay, pblive is asking, why do you think religious Christian groups still hold on to the incorrect Roman ideal image of Jesus and not a more realistic portrayal of his face? Is it just that this has now been his image for far too long, then it would be impossible to change? So by Roman ideal, I think he's meaning the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, rather than a more realistic portrayal. So for anyone interested in seeing a more realistic portrayal of probably what Jesus would have looked like, we have lots of paintings that were found on Egyptian mummies. So these would actually be fastened onto the mummy wrappings, and they reflect the portraits of what the average person from around the first century would look like, with olive skin, dark hair, and non-Western European features. So as to why Christian groups still hold on to this image of Jesus, I think it's maybe, I mean, I'm not a psychology expert, but something as simple as basic human psychology. We want Jesus to look like one of us, right? So for most of Europe, obviously this is going to be the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, European-looking Jesus. But he's one of us, you know. And other cultures have different kinds of Jesuses as well, whether Asian or African and so on. The question is, how problematic is it to do this? Is it okay to portray Jesus as a person that looks something more like you, if it helps you to feel like, I don't know, somehow closer to him as like a religious devotional kind of a thing? That's a hard question, and I don't know the answer to it. Maybe it probably would be better, yeah, if we would have less Western European images of Jesus around. And obviously, one of my jobs as a historian of Jesus is to make sure that people know that he didn't look like the blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. He didn't look very much like someone like me. But there's also a very interesting phenomenon going on in early Christianity, which is actually parallel with Jesus. So it's a weird phenomenon that in the Gospels, Jesus is never given any kind of physical description for the most part. I mean, he has hands and feet, which are there, but there's not a whole lot else about him in terms of, you know, what his hair color is or his facial features and so on. And that's kind of strange because in ancient biographies, we expect, in fact, descriptions about their physical appearance. And I gave a lecture on this subject not too long ago on the expectation of someone like Jesus. We would expect him to be perfect in how he looks. The beautiful maybe image that you see Christian groups using of him. And I think I'm pretty sure it's Celsus, in fact. Celsus is one of the earliest heretics who's critiquing Christians. And one of the critiques about Jesus is, in fact, his appearance. So Celsus is reporting secondhand from what other Christians have said about Jesus, how how Christians see Jesus as being nothing in particular to look at, in fact, being probably a bit ugly and unassuming. Whereas one would expect a savior, someone who's so close to God, to be perfect in his form and beautiful. So this is fascinating because this is a secondhand account from Celsus reporting what Christians were saying. In other words, that Christians, at least in the early church, thought about Jesus's body as something humble and ugly and unassuming, not beautiful at all. So I find that to be very fascinating. And also because there's a good analogy with the fable material, in fact. So the cover of my book, which I'll hold up here, you can see that's Aesop at the top of there, sitting on the podium in a sense, and then people are paying attention to him. But you'll see from the size of his body that he maybe doesn't look exactly as you'd imagine a perfect human figure. Aesop is depicted as a hunchback and a dwarf, and in fact, this is a pretty charitable depiction of how he's described in the biography written about him. This is the best image I could find that actually reflects Aesop's disabilities and his physical features. But in the opening of the life of Aesop, the first verses talk about how he is hideous in aspect, loathsome to look at, hunchbacked, short-armed, curved legs, swarthy. So there's even it's likely that Aesop is supposed to be depicted as black as well. So Aesop possibly comes from the word Aethop as an Ethiopian. Later tradition, just like Jesus, would transform his skin color and his appearance. And I need to write an article on this. It's in my bank of articles to write, but I certainly see a really strong parallel between how these characters are received through history. Jesus and Aesop both start off as ugly, unassuming, popular class heroes who over the centuries have their physical appearances, along with their messages, you could say, transformed into something more palatable. So if you look at a picture of Aesop, Google image search it even, you'll find him both as the hideous hunchback kind of ugly character, but eventually he becomes an upstanding, literal and figuratively, upstanding philosopher who's wearing fancy clothes and is holding books and so on. So why do we do this? That's a good question, but we see something parallel going on with both Aesop and Jesus. Is it good or is it bad? It's probably not so good, but at least in my job as a professor working on biblical studies kind of stuff, I'll do my best to correct it when I can. So thanks for the question.